So for the integumentary system, I put together diagrams out of two different textbooks, trying to decide which ones I like the best. So we'll look at this one. The integument is the skin. The integumentary system is the skin and the associated organs like fingernails, hair, things like that. So the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis was our example for keratinized stratified squamous epithelia. So if you remember, epidermis is an epithelium. The deeper tissue below the dermis, you're looking at loose connective tissue, and eventually deeper into the subcutaneous layer, or sometimes known as hypodermis, subcutaneous fat and adipose. So looking at the epidermis, we'll look at the 5 layers of it in a little more detail, but if you notice, the border between the epidermis and dermis is wavy. What you see there is a papillary layer where the waves, or the little finger-like extensions, extend, and then a deeper reticular layer as subdivisions of the dermis. Again, what you find in each layer will be different. If you notice the papillary layer, you've got these little bundles of capillaries and some light touch sensors that extend up into those dermal papilla, those little finger-like projections. And you also see the occasional sweat gland pore that goes through that area. Parts of the reticular layer, you see the hair follicles, the rector pili muscles associated with the hair follicles that make the hair stand on end, the sebaceous glands, the oil glands associated with the hair follicles that keep the hair oiled. And deeper in the reticular layer, you will see deep touch receptors, hot-cold receptors. They're not specified here, but that's where they are, and sweat glands as well as deeper kind of arterioles and venules. And then again, deeper in that, subcutaneous layers, you're looking at adipose. Deeper that, you would look at probably muscle or whatever the deeper tissue is in that area, just depending. I mean, if you're looking at the ear, the skin of the ear, deep to that skin would be, the fibrocartilage mold of the, elastic cartilage mold of the ear. So just, that's what you're looking at when you give a subcutaneous injection. You're sticking that needle just under the skin into that subcutaneous layer. So here, the epidermis is shown kind of pulled off the dermis, so you get a 3-dimensional look at the dermal papilla. But those finger-like projections increase the grip basically between those 2 layers. There's a lot of friction your skin is exposed to, and those layers prevent slippage of the epidermis off the dermis. So here again, from a different textbook, there's a little bit more going on in this diagram. They've got the various Pacinian, Meissner's corpuscles labeled. Again, I wouldn't ask you the different touch receptors. You may cover that in lecture, but basically for my purposes, I want you to know sweat and sebaceous glands, hair follicle, rector pili, dermis, epidermis, papillary versus reticular layer, and the subcutaneous or hypodermis. Those are the big things I want you to know off of this diagram. So taking a closer look at the epidermis, here we have an example of keratinized stratified squamous epithelia. So the epidermis, and we're also looking at thick skin. Okay, we'll talk about the difference here in the next couple of slides, but thick skin you find on the palms and the soles. Everywhere else is what's referred to as thin skin. So with thick skin, you see 2 different things. You see the presence of the stratum lucidum layer, and you see the stratum corneum layer be very, very thick. Again, friction resistance is a big part of this as well. So you've got a photomicrograph on the left and kind of a cartoon on the right. But if you go on from the dermis, working your way from deep to superficial, the first layer of the epidermis is the stratum basale, which is a single layer of cells that is undergoing rapid mitosis. One daughter cell stays behind in the stratum basale layer. The other daughter moves up to the next layer called the stratum spinosum and moves through the layers and eventually will be sloughed off the skin as a dead keratinocyte. So the stratum spinosum cells, as they move through the layers, they get older and older. Again, they're pushed up by younger cells. So they change and mature as they move through these layers. They will accumulate keratin into what's known as a keratinohyaline. That granules of keratinohyaline stain a very dark purple. So when you look at the next layer, the stratum granulosum, that layer is named for the dark purple granules of keratinohyaline that the cells have accumulated. At this layer, the cells start to die, and by the next layer, the stratum lucidum, all you're looking at is the empty shell of a cell replaced by keratin, this waterproofing protein that again prevents water from being lost to the deeper cells, and is a kind of a tough protective protein as well. So if you look at the photomicrograph, you can see tears and things like that in the thicker layer, the stratum corneum. So the stratum corneum, again, in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, is very, very thick. Friction resistance. So the cells in the stratum lucidum and stratum corneum are dead, and they are referred to as keratinocytes at this point. Well, they're keratinocytes through the whole thing, but being filled with keratin at this point. So they're just hollow shells of a cell filled with keratin. So again, kind of another cartoon looking at the cells as you progress through. If you look at the number of cells in each layer, stratum basale has got like one cell layer thick. Stratum spinosum varies depending on whether you're next to a dermal papilla or above the dermal papilla. And in stratum granulosum, 2 to 3 to 4 cells. Stratum lucidum, 3 to 4 cells, and stratum corneum again can vary depending on whether you're looking at thin skin or thick, from a few layers to dozens. So again, kind of a description of each of the layers, but you should know the 5 layers and know a little bit about them, be able to identify them on either a photomicrograph or kind of like a cartoon drawing. But again, going from deep to superficial, you have stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. And again, those are in thick skin. Stratum lucidum is the one that you lose when you're looking at thin skin. So comparing thin and thick, again, thick is what we've been looking at kind of on the left. You see on the palms and the soles, you have this very thick stratum corneum layer. Again, basically abrasion resistance. But everywhere else, you have no stratum lucidum and a very relatively thin stratum corneum. So if you see the stratum corneum layer over here is just a couple of cells thick, but that is the waterproofing, again, kind of the abrasion resistance. You think how much abrasion resistance you have on your fingertips versus other thin areas of the skin. So thick versus thin skin, you should kind of know that, where those are located as well. So for sun protection, the melanocytes are cells that the nuclei, or the cell body, I guess, kind of sits in the stratum basale layer. And there are these appendages that reach up into the other layers, the lower layers of the stratum spinosum. The appendages have little vacuoles filled with melanin, and basically they pinch off vacuoles, and the keratinocytes pick up the melanin and deposit it on the skin side of the nucleus to protect or the sun side of the nucleus to protect the DNA. So they know which side is apical, which is the apical surface of that epithelium, which is the basal surface. So if you notice there, those little specks of melanin are deposited on one side of the nucleus to shield it basically from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So again, out of another textbook, kind of the same type of diagram showing you the melanin, how the pigment is picked up by the surrounding keratinocytes to shield their nuclei from the UV rays of the sun. Again, kind of a table showing the various layers of the epidermis and dermis, and a little description of each. You should be able to recognize each of those layers, again, just either by description or on the models or diagram, something of that effect.